It has officially been 2 years since I proclaimed Project Demigod the best Spider-Man VR game, and since then, even with intense competition from Battleglide, that title hasn't changed. But something else that remains the same is that price. You'll need to spend a whole $30-ish to get in on the fun, but not everybody has that kind of change lying around. So here I propose my solution. I've found 5 amazing and completely free Spider-Man VR games that you can play right now. I'm ranking them from my least to most favorite because I enjoy all of these games. Except Spider-Man WebVR was the first ever game that I reviewed in my Spider-Man VR Hunt series, but despite holding that coveted position, it scored dead last in the final part's tech demo rankings, and you're about to find out why. WebVR's whole gimmick is that the game is played completely over the internet, meaning no download required. What you're going to find in terms of gameplay isn't stellar. I've long harped on about the specific features needed to make VR web swinging feel great, and one of those is having you and your webs operate like a pendulum. What WebVR does instead is make them function like grapples, which not only isn't character accurate, but is nowhere near as thrilling as learning to smoothly transition momentum between pendular swings. Plus, you'll quickly get bored of the city and the lack of anything to do in it besides endlessly collecting crystals. If you truly have no other options, WebVR will do the trick, but you're better off playing literally anything else. One of the Silkworm's standout features is its comparatively crawling web travel time. From my experience, this actually gets in the way of me having fun with the game, and it's further exemplified by the game's apparent lack of a speed cap. See, if you use the webs right, you can get up to some crazy speeds, and when you're going that quick, the lag between shooting a web and it connecting with a surface increases exponentially. What you end up with is a fairly high skill floor, requiring that players adapt to this travel time in order to swing smoothly around the city. I might have had time for that when I was 12, but nowadays, I just want to jump in and have fun. Speaking of the city though, it does something genuinely impressive by recreating a portion of New York City in what appears to be true to life scale, albeit blocky and brown true to life scale. You'll be able to make out famous real life buildings like the Empire State and this bridge. It is the Golden Gate Bridge. I think. The Silkworm's final innovation comes from how it makes your webs actual objects. They remain after you shoot them, and combining multiple allows you to make structures for climbing or even zip lines. But while fun, these features, as well as the game's unnoteworthy wall crawling, are outclassed by the swinging in terms of practicality every single time. But still, they're better to have than not. The Silkworm makes for a competent skill check in the Spider-Man VR genre that might not be for everyone, but is going to provide a gnarly challenge for some. Somehow, in my 4 months of researching, playing, and writing about Project Demigod in 2022, I neglected to mention that the game has a free demo that everybody can play. And if that sounds too good to be true, that's because it is. While the demo does give you a sizable chunk of the best Spider-Man VR game experience, it's lacking those little morsels that put it over that line. To begin with, the demo is several versions behind the full game, and there's a reason I capitalized several in the script. Just look at the difference between the demo and the full game's home environments. It's literally night and day. But while you won't have access to the awesome acrobatics, wall running, giant enemies, flying enemies, venom powers, dozens of maps, and all the mods you could possibly dream of from the later versions, you will have access to the core gameplay that won it the best game title. That is, with a few caveats. The demo's combat is fairly good and gives you a lot of room to express yourself. You're still able to parry melee attacks with the game's slow motion, something from the full version that I adored and refuse to give up in other Spider-Man VR games now. Even 2 years after I reviewed the game properly, it's still so much fun to redirect punches and catch sword swings. I did notice that knockback appears to have been buffed in versions beyond the demo. You can see in these clips from Finale that my punches appear to make the enemies real more than they do here. And while that's a minor thing, it can certainly get annoying when you're trying to dispatch one enemy and move on to another. You can still throw enemies through walls or even use the fragments as weapons, since Training Grounds, my favourite map, is one of the maps you have access to in the demo. If you're looking to swing through a city though, you're out of luck, as Millennium City is locked behind the paywall. And if you try the swinging anyway, you'll notice something the Demigod Demo has in common with Spider-Man WebVR: grapple webs. This is something you can turn off in the full version, but from my testing, you can't open the settings menu to do so in the demo, meaning you're stuck with this less than stellar swinging. It's certainly not as bad as WebVR's, but it's not good either. At the end of the day, the Project Demigod demo is good enough for a taste of the best Spider-Man VR game, but it's never going to replace the full version. The Spider-Lair is the Spider-Man VR game that has arguably undergone the greatest transformation over the 3 years I've been talking about these games. When I first reviewed it in 2021, it had a fairly small game world and was the only game in the genre with multiplayer, considering the whole thing is built inside VR chat. Nowadays, the Spider-Lair has entered its ultimate iteration, with the superior version on the horizon. It promises to add wall running and swinging while flipping, both awesome features, but with that, the ultimate Spider-Lair is nowhere near lacking in content. If anything, it's the most content-rich game on this list. Starting with the movement, I have to be honest. I've never been too big a fan of the Spider-Lair's flavour of web swinging. I've always found the webs too elastic-like and bouncy, and had trouble gaining proper momentum right off rip. The former remains a dislike for me, but the latter has been fixed entirely through the introduction of a feature I've been championing since I reviewed Battle Glide earlier this year: the web slingshot. By shooting 2 webs at parallel buildings, holding the triggers on your controllers, pulling the webs down and releasing, you're able to fling yourself into the air and begin swinging, just like in Spider-Man's flat games. From there, web zips have also been reworked. Doing the same motion with one or both of your hands will shoot you off in whatever direction you're facing, allowing you to speed around corners or through small gaps. But if all of that isn't enough for you, the Lair also has this hard mode option, which, when turned on, forces you to periodically reload your web shooters, time your web zips carefully, and take fall damage should you not follow any of those instructions. You'll notice though that the Spider-Lair doesn't have any form of combat, and yeah, that is a huge downer. However, the Spider-Lair contains a multitude of other features that fill the hole left by this cornerstone of the genre. Acrobatics make an appearance here by way of double tapping the jump button and using the joystick in midair. But even though we've seen these mechanics before, they facilitate a brand new one, never before seen in any Spider-Man VR game: web wings. They're a little tricky to activate, but the physics feel fantastic. You can really feel the drag and resistance of the air, making for a far more realistic gliding feature than in games like Zenith or Population 1. My only gripes are that you can't shoot webs to speed yourself up, like in Spider-Man 2, and that while gliding, the game shifts your view so that looking forward is looking down, and looking up is looking forward. I get that it's more realistic, but it hurts your neck after literally 10 seconds. Realism isn't always fun. Outside of the web wings, the ultimate Spider-Lair innovates with unprecedented customization options. You can change the color, texture, and sound of your webs, adjust the time of day, and customize the weather down to how densely it snows. The latter settings change the map in real time, and quite like the Silkworm, the Spider-Lair's game world is a replica of New York City, sewers and all. I won't venture to say that it's to scale, but for all intents and purposes, it feels so, which is all that really matters. You've got so much room to play around with that, unlike in other versions of the Spider-Lair, you'll hit a world border much less often. Tying all of this together is the Spider-Lair's thriving multiplayer community. The team behind the Lair are always doing community events, so it's more than just a great Spider-Man VR game. It's a great place to hang out. With that said though, it's not my favourite. So, in case you didn't know, Untangled is Web Guy VR, the game that won second best Spider-Man VR tech demo in Spider-Man Hunt Finale. It was around August this year that the game recaptured my attention, but coming back to it recently after about a month and a half, I found that the game had been updated once again, and this time with several features missing. Confused, I headed into the game's Discord, where I found that the project is undergoing a complete creative reboot, with old mechanics being remade to be better than they were before. I realized the extent of this creative reboot when I tried out the new swinging. It is perfect. It employs a more or less identical web zipping system to that of the ultimate Spider-Lair, which means, of course, the web slingshot is back and works beautifully. I will never go without this feature again, seriously. Now listen, I previously said that Battle Glide's web zips were the best, but having experienced this new system that seems to be planting its roots in the genre, I have to say I much prefer it. I imagine it'll come particularly in handy when the game's combat makes a return. In the version before the current, Untangled contained 2 enemy types, prisoners and symbiotes. At the time, they both had identical attacks that sadly were a lot harder to parry than in something like Project Demigod, since you don't have access to slow motion spider sense. That being said, Untangled having multiplayer means that you can team up with your friends to do awesome takedowns like this. I would love it if the dev team could find some way to incorporate spider sense, but if that's not possible, leaning into these player interactions should be a priority. Thinking back to the enemy types, I'm excited by how they could possibly be differentiated. Imagine if the prisoners used melee and ranged weapons that you could disarm from them, like in Battle Glide. What if there were on-street skirmishes between the symbiotes and prisoners that you and your friends have to stop, with the symbiotes trying to take over the prisoners? I can imagine myself doing a ground pound with my webs to stun the symbiotes before delivering a massive punch to take one out. Or even doing the same thing by slamming 2 swords together to make a piercing, humming vibration. There's so many possibilities here, and that's what really excites me about Untangled. In its current state, it's a great time, but truly, it's the prospect of what the game could be that makes it my favourite free Spider-Man VR game. It's that same forward-facing outlook that won Demigod the best game title. And between me and you, I think that in a year's time, if the Untangled dev team can pull off this creative remake, next to Battleglide, we might have 2 new contenders to challenge Demigod's best game status. And if that happens, just perhaps, the hunt may be reborn.